Winning fixes everything. You've probably heard some variation of that statement in reference to whatever team sport you're a fan of. But what happens when a situation gets so toxic that even winning more than any team in the past several decades can't fix it? You might crash out and give the world the greatest train wreck of a season ever witnessed and a future case study for team implosions. Or you can somehow tune out the noise and put together one more title run like the ones that have defined your team as a dynasty, knowing full well that the clock will strike midnight at the end of the season and the magic will be gone. But before that clock strikes midnight, you have just enough time for one last dance. This is the story of how Michael Jordan capped off the greatest era in Chicago Bulls history. Let's take a trip down memory lane and recap how the Bulls got themselves into the mess that was the 1997-98 season. You probably already know about Jordan's first retirement in 1993 after his first three-peat with the Bulls. The real reasons for his retirement remain a topic of some debate. If you believe the official version, it was a combination of burnout and the emotional toll caused by the murder of his father. If you prefer the tinfoil hat version, it was an unofficial suspension due to Jordan's gambling issues causing a potential PR nightmare for the league. Naturally, both Jordan and the NBA denied this story, but nobody is going to admit that they suspended the face of their league and then tried to hide it. The 2 years he spent away from basketball gave an opening that the Houston Rockets used to win back-to-back titles in 94 and 95. With Jordan returning for the 1995-96 season and the Bulls arguably having an even better roster compared to their first three-peat, the league was put on notice. The new Bulls squad still featured Jordan and Pippen as the headliners, but additions like Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, Bill Cartwright, and Tony Kukoc gave them elite depth. With the team being even more lethal than before, what's there not to like? Well, that depends on who you ask. If you ask Michael and Scotty, GM Jerry Krause is there not to like. Jerry was a flawed character, but he's nowhere near the villain he was made out to be in the documentary. He had a keen eye for talent, both playing and coaching. He's the guy who discovered Phil Jackson, brought him to the NBA, and eventually promoted him to head coach. He also drafted Tony Kukoc in 1990, eventually bringing him over in 1993. But more on the problems that caused in a minute. When they were winning, Jordan and Pippen were praised for their play, Phil Jackson for his coaching, and Jerry was never mentioned for his role in building the team. He felt underappreciated for the work he put into creating this dynasty, going so far as saying that players and coaches don't win championships, organizations do. This didn't help his popularity in the locker room. There was an especially big rift between Krause and the team's two biggest stars. Back in 1991, Scottie Pippen had a choice to make for his next NBA contract. He could either take a longer deal for less annual money, or gamble on himself with a shorter deal and cash in with the one after that. Pippen's desire to secure his family's financial future won out, and he took a 7-year deal that paid him around $2.8 million per year. A few years later, Pippen was a top 5 player in the league, but he wasn't in the top 5 highest paid players on his team. He wanted to renegotiate his deal, which Krause rejected without a second thought. Jordan took Pippen's side in the feud, and the team's biggest stars were at war with the GM. Almost any other GM would be fired, but Jerry had unconditional support from the team ownership, which is understandable given the results he was delivering. The deal Krause gave Tony Kukoc just added insult to injury for Pippen. Krause gave a guy who had yet to play a single minute in the NBA almost the same deal that Pippen was signed to, 7 years, $18 million. While Tony was a legend in Europe and he had quickly lived up to his NBA deal, Pippen, and by extension MJ, were understandably pissed. Phil Jackson's prominence in the media rubbed Jerry the wrong way, especially given how Phil lapped it up without shining any light on Jerry, the guy who had discovered him all those years ago. With both MJ and Scotty far on the wrong side of 30 and the team on the danger of becoming too expensive, Krause had already begun planning the next era of the Chicago Bulls, one that required a full rebuild. In his mind, the rebuild required a new man at the helm, so Krause had begun courting Tim Floyd, a college coach, to become the new head coach for the Bulls, even inviting him to dinners while Phil was still with the team. Scotty would be up for a new contract after the season, and it was questionable if he would even want to re-sign with the Bulls. Krause told Phil that 1997-98 would be his final season coaching the team, even if he led the team to an 82-0 record and won a title. Jordan vowed to never play for a coach other than Phil, so getting rid of Phil would likely mean losing the 35-year-old Jordan as well. The Nuggets firing Mike Malone with a week left in the season this year is nasty work, but effectively firing your coach before the season even starts and then letting him coach that entire season might somehow be even more crazy. Pippen had a foot injury that required surgery to fully repair, but he chose to wait until after the offseason to have the surgery so he could enjoy his summer. Everyone actually knew he was doing that to stick it to Jerry. This caused him to miss the first 35 games of the season. The writing for the team was on the wall, and they knew it. This would be their last season together, and the sense in the locker room was, it, we ball. Despite the attitude, knowing that your team is basically on the clock and missing your second best player makes playing good difficult for anyone. In the first 35 games without Scottie, the Bulls had a 24-11 record, a far cry from the 31-4 record they had at the same point of the season the year before. Scottie's frustration with his contract was felt throughout the team, but getting back on the floor refocused him on the ultimate prize. With Pippen back in the fold, the team went back to their old selves, finishing the regular season with a 62-20 record and the #1 seed in the East entering the playoffs. Jordan won his 5th MVP record, proving he was still as dominant as ever despite being past his physical prime. Pippen had a great defensive season, finishing 5th in DPOY voting. Rodman led the league in rebounds with an insane average of 15 per game. Kukoc and Kerr were as reliable as ever, and it was clear that the path to the championship for any contender would eventually run through the Bulls. The series against the 8th seed New Jersey Nets wasn't expected to last long. The first round back then was a best of 5, and the Bulls matched expectations with a quick 3-0 sweep. The second round series against the 4th seed Charlotte Hornets was a tougher challenge. The Hornets even managed to draw blood with a scrappy 78-76 win in Chicago. The Bulls kicked things into higher gear after that game, closing the series out in 5 games. Reggie Miller and the 2nd seed Indiana Pacers were the final challengers standing in the East. The Bulls defended home court in the first 2 games, but the Pacers won the next 2 games with a combined differential of 4 points once the series shifted to Indiana. The Bulls took Game 5 in Chicago in a blowout win where Jordan led all scorers with 29. Reggie Miller had an absolute stinker of a Game 6, scoring just 8 points on tour date shooting splits. The rest of the Pacers stepped up big time, and they took another nail-biter behind 25 points from Rick Smits. With the home team winning every game of the series so far, Chicago had the obvious edge entering Game 7. Jordan and Kukoc combined for 49 points en route to an 88-83 win. With their ticket punched, they prepared to take on the Utah Jazz in the finals. The two teams knew each other well, especially given how they faced each other in the finals the year before. The finals format was different to your regular 2-2-1-1-1 series. The finals format was 2-3-2, meaning that Game 6 and 7, if needed, would be played in Utah, who had home court advantage in the series. Karl Malone and John Stockton led a great Jazz team that was a tough matchup for just about every team in the league. The Bulls won their previous series against them 4-2, but that meant nothing now. Game 1 in Utah was a low-scoring affair that went into OT. Despite 33 points from MJ, Utah drew first blood in the series. A subpar game from Malone and a 37-point outburst by MJ evened things out after 2 games. With the series moving to Chicago for the next 3 games, the Bulls could theoretically finish things on their home court. The Bulls absolutely dog-walked the Jazz in Game 3. Malone seems to have been the only Jazz player who actually showed up, with everyone else scoring in single digits. The Bulls played all 12 players in a 38-point blowout. Even the end bench guys who barely see the court at any point of the season all logged over 5 minutes in a finals game. The Jazz managed to pick themselves back up, and Game 4 was a much more competitive affair. Malone once again led the way for the Jazz, but he couldn't overcome Michael and Scottie, who combined for 52 points on their own. The final score read 86-82, and the Bulls went up 3-1, with the opportunity to deliver the final blow at home. No team had ever come back when down 3-1 in the finals before, so the Jazz had a steep mountain to climb. They held a 4-point lead late in Game 5 before Kukoc hit a huge 3 with just 5.5 seconds to go. It was an obvious intentional foul situation, but the Jazz ran a great play to delay a foul on a player with the ball. By the time the Bulls had managed to foul, there was just over a second left on the game clock. To make things worse, it was the 6th foul on Pippen, meaning he wouldn't be available for the potential game-winning play. Hornacek missed the first free throw, and instead of intentionally missing the second one and letting the clock run out, he hit the second shot for a 2-point Jazz lead. The Bulls immediately called for time and chose to inbound at half court. Pippen was out of the game, but MJ, Kerr, and Kukoc were still in, and Kukoc was on fire in this game. One timeout turned into 3 as both coaches tried to out-scheme the other. When the ball was finally inbounded, it was knocked out of bounds before it could get to Steve Kerr in the corner. The only shot the Bulls managed to get was a long 3 from Jordan that missed everything. The Jazz still clung to life in the series, and with the final 2 games being in Utah, anything was on the cards. Pippen was horrible in Game 5, going just 2 of 16 from the field for 6 points. Kukoc led the Bulls with 30, and MJ had 28, but Karl Malone poured in 39 on his own on the other end. If the Jazz could survive Game 6, they would be at a massive advantage for the deciding Game 7. The Bulls were just 4-4 in road games in the playoffs, which didn't exactly inspire confidence. The Bulls also knew this, so if they were going to win this series, it would need to be in Game 6. Based on the series performance so far, it was pretty much guaranteed that MJ would get his and that Karl Malone would get his. The question was, who else was going to show up for either team? Scottie Pippen was allegedly dealing with back pain, which meant he probably wouldn't be carrying his usual offensive or defensive load. With just under 5 minutes left in the fourth, the game was tied at 77. Malone was imposing his will down low all game long, and his offensive rebound and short jumper broke the tie. He was leading the Jazz in scoring with 29. The Jazz played almost 24 seconds of perfect defense on the next possession, but Harper hit a circus shot to tie the game at 79. MJ had been carrying the offensive load for the Bulls even more than usual with 37 points so far, and he was exhausted late in the fourth. You could even say he was forcing things as he was just 13 of 32 from the field so far. A three-pointer he put up barely made it to the front of the rim, but he managed to sprint back and steal a long pass from Hornacek that would have led to the Jazz going up by 4. The entire Jazz defense was focused on Jordan, and he was seeing frequent double teams. Neither team had a foul to give, so every foul meant free throws. The Jazz were faithful to their bread and butter play, Malone screening for Stockton. A pick and pop between the two of them and yet another jumper from Malone put the Jazz up by 4 with 2:24 left in the game. The Bulls' game plan boiled down to just tossing the ball to MJ and getting the hell out of his way. If Jordan was doubled or if he had to pick up his dribble, receive the pass and give the ball right back to him. One such creative play led to MJ willing his way to the free throw line where he nailed both. The Jazz went to the two-man game once again, but this time it was Stockton taking a shot that missed. The Jazz got a huge offensive rebound, but Russell couldn't hold on to the ball. MJ went for the hero ball approach once again, and he once again missed short. Stockton took an open three that could have been the dagger, but he barely missed. Every Bulls player not named Jordan had only one job on offense: pass the ball to the guy who was named Jordan. MJ once again played one-on-one and drove to the basket. Stockton slid over to take a charge, but he was just a split second too late to establish position. Another trip to the line for MJ, another 2 points, game tied at 83. The Jazz weren't in the mood for anything complicated, so they just dumped the ball in the post to Malone, who was immediately doubled. Fortunately for them, Stockton curled to the weak side where he was ready for a pass from Malone. He took a three, and this time it was nothing but net. The arena erupted in cheers as the Jazz went up by 3 with just 40 seconds left. Jazz fans were probably already looking forward to Game 7. The Bulls called for time and decided to inbound from half court in an almost textbook 2-for-1 situation. If you're the Jazz, it's fine to give up a basket as long as you don't give it up too quickly. Russell didn't get the memo, as he allowed Jordan to drive past him and score just 4 seconds into the play. Despite the 1-point lead, the pressure was now on the Jazz, because the Bulls would have the final shot no matter what. The Jazz rushed things, getting the ball to Malone in the post without him having fully established position. This made it possible for Jordan to sneak up and knock the ball out of Malone's hands for the steal. As MJ was bringing the ball up the court, the Jazz made zero effort to disrupt him or to try to get it out of his hands. Russell was left on an island. Jordan drove, crossed at the top of the key, dropped Russell, and knocked down the go-ahead jumper with just 6 seconds left. Every single Jazz fan saw a clear push and every Bulls fan saw a clean play. Regardless, the ball swished through and the Bulls were up by 1. Utah called for time. They went from an almost certain Game 7 to having under 7 seconds to save their season. They lost to the Bulls in 6 games the year before, and history was dangerously close to repeating itself. The pressure clearly got to them as they once again rushed things on the final play. They probably could have gotten a better shot, but Stockton took a contested 3 that just barely missed. The Bulls bench erupted in celebration for their second three-peat. Jordan finished the game with 45 points, and his final shot remains one of the most iconic in league history. They may have finished their last dance in the best possible way, but the final buzzer also meant that the clock had struck midnight and the magic was over. After the season, Scottie Pippen went to the Rockets, and Phil Jackson was out of the door vowing never to coach again. MJ chose to retire for the second time, leaving the game on top and on his own terms, with the championship-winning shot as his farewell card. And just like that, the Bulls dynasty that terrorized the league for the better part of a decade was no more. The league hasn't seen such a dynasty rise since, and it's doubtful if we ever will.